Hello and welcome to L Unfiltered, formerly TianquiztliCreations podcast. I'm your host, L, and welcome to the rebrand of my podcast channel with more topics and more guest speakers. And I'm excited, guys. I know that I have a lot of listeners that have been around for the last year and a half when I started the channel. And we started with just narrating the stories I wrote for Scary Stories Keep You Up at Night. And that was very exciting. We moved on to small segments about hauntings and science stuff and a bunch of other cryptid zoo creatures. And now we're coming back with new topics, more people, and just more relatable content. So if you have been with me since then, thank you for continuing to listen to my craziness. It's only going to get much more interesting. And today I have a returning guest. We've had John on a few of our episodes here, and he's back for some more. How are you doing, John?
Hey, how you doing? I'm doing good. I'm glad to be back.
I know we haven't seen you since our Smiley Killer episode, which was like sometime in the summer.
Right.
I
Yeah.
was in Virginia. Yeah.
And now we're here for this episode, which is kind of the opposite of that kind of topic.
Yeah, I would say so, kind of the opposite. And you know, it's crazy because I think there's something going on in Austin now, similar to that whole Smiley Killer thing out in Lady Bird Lake.
Right.
Yeah. So there's
That's
references to that. So that's something we're gonna have to come back to. I haven't been paying too much
Actually, that
attention
would
to.
do like an update episode on like 'cause I think we mentioned it in that podcast episode. So yeah, see where we're at now with that story.
I know. It's like TikTok is really my news outlet, so that's where I've been getting all my information. I was just going to go walk above the Lady Bird Lake because there's this really cool stairway above in Austin, and it's really nice during the sunset times. And I was like, maybe not.
I feel like that was a good call.
Yeah, I think so too. But maybe not. We're gonna skip that trip. We're gonna come back later on. But
Wise
something.
decision.
Yes, definitely. Since we're on the topic of Austin, though, something I realized there's a lot of small businesses closing right now along the highway, especially. I don't know. Yeah, they're expanding, I guess. And a lot of the business I follow, one of them being Glass Coffin, which me and you have talked about going. We haven't gone yet, but they're closing. They'll be closing in August.
Oh no, I follow them on Instagram. Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think many like them have just, gotten the notice that they need to move out and it's just too expensive to try and stay. So
You know
that's
what?
sad.
Yeah, when it comes to like physical locations, and that's why a lot of like these mom and pop type shops just go fully digital, fully online. I think it's just easier to maintain. You don't have to worry about paying a landlord to just operate your business.
Exactly. As a former, and I say former small business owner because I will be closing my doors as well later this month for my shop. It is something that came to mind at some point to open a brick and mortar because it was my dream to have the shop and have people come in and do all kinds of artsy stuff. But then honestly, the cost that it would, keep me, or I would have to keep me open would just be over the top at this point. And with, bigger companies like Walmart, Target, Amazon, people are just not really keen on going into small business anymore. I feel like you have your group of people who are very adamant, only shop small, but then everybody else is going to do what's easiest and more affordable.
Yeah, it's always going to be harder to scale up your operation when down the street people are flooding Walmart or Target or whoever's parking lots to go shopping. Yeah, it's true. I don't know what the solution for that is other than end capitalism once and for all.
What do they say? Let them eat cake. No, what's the other one? Eat the rich. Eat the rich.
Eat the rich. Yes, always eat the rich. Yes.
But I could keep talking about this because there's many things that have been going on TikTok in regards to that, like the Kellogg CEO and
the boycott. They're doing a boycott of Kellogg, right?
Exactly. I mean, honestly, the prices have been going up. Exactly. Like the prices have been going up and the bags have been getting smaller. So
man,
I don't know.
Mac chicken sandwich at McDonald's, a Mac chicken sandwich a year ago was like $1, and now it's like $2.89. Like in 1 year, like that's a huge rate of inflation on something that so many people depended on for like a quick meal, to get them between in the middle of their business day or whatever. Like it's really wild out there. Like these rich, people out there, they're really trying to destroy the middle class. They're really trying to just make it two classes, the poor and the rich, and nothing in between.
Exactly.
Like it's wild, and
That's
they're keeping all
true.
the profits. But that's neither
That's
here nor
true.
there because I could go on a capitalistic rant
Exactly. There's
or
many things. Yeah,
anti-capitalism rant.
anti-capitalism. One thing I have to add though before we move on to our actual topic is that this last weekend I was in a rush to go, get out of town, and it was the second time in like 2 weeks I had McDonald's, which I'm not supposed to because I have stomach issues. Who doesn't at this age? But
Mhm.
anyway, so I stopped by and I said, quick, it's gonna be super cheap. It's McDonald's, whatever. It was like 20 something dollars for 2 meals.
Yeah.
What? Like what? And it was the saltiest thing I've ever had, like, well, recently. Like, I
Yeah,
was not
it's a lot
happy.
of sodium and $20. If you're gonna go anywhere for $20, go to Taco Bell. You can still get a lot of food at Taco Bell for I think right now for that amount of money. At least in my most recent experience. Yeah,
Mhm.
you can fill
My
a
best,
bag.
yeah, my best bet, honestly, is stay away from fast food because not only am
But
I like
honestly,
lactose
yeah,
intolerant, I also
yeah,
can't do the
or
salt.
that, or buy a whole bunch of ramen and just like season it your way at home with some healthy stuff.
When I leave, I'm just gonna start getting trail mix or something, cut up some fruit, like be that person. Because I tell you,
Mhm.
I eat it and then later on, I'm like, I should have done that every time. But all right, so today's topic at hand, really interesting. We are going to jump into a little bit of a religious subject here. It could be a little bit touchy for some, but guys, as I always remind you, we're here to share opinions, take what you want or nothing at all. Okay. So we are going to lead into exploring the theory that Jesus was a magician. Have you heard about that?
Intriguing. Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting thing to talk about. And I just to clear the air, my qualifications are I don't have any to be talking this subject, although that's not really true. Like meaning I'm not like a PhD scholar, although I was friends with one. However, I do have 18 years worth of being a very zealous Christian, which I now regret. But as a former Christian and more of an agnostic, I do have a lot of experience with this kind of lore about Jesus and refuting it or kind of where it comes from. So this will be an interesting conversation, I think.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited. So obviously, there's no introduction for Jesus Christ. We have all heard about him. I
What
hope
can
so.
you
I mean,
say
if you
about the
haven't,
man? It
that's
hasn't
okay.
already been said. The
Exactly.
one, the only, right? Mm-hmm.
And this topic really caught my attention because growing up, I was raised Catholic, right? So
Mm.
they send me off on my way every Sunday to go to my Catholic school church thing, and or every Saturday, and then every Sunday I would have to attend mass, right? And get
Mm.
my little card they gave you. They stamp it for you, and then you went to mass. And
Mm.
so I had a lot of questions growing up, right? Because I think for me, growing up has always been the scientific side of things more than the religious, even though my mother would have wished it was the opposite. But I've always questioned things. So when we started reading into the Bible and what Jesus was able to do, and then I'm like, well, how did he do that? How is that
Mm-hmm.
possible? And then how is what he's doing different from me watching or reading Harry Potter? Like, why is that wrong? But this isn't wrong.
Right, right.
Many questions that my mom would simply sometimes be like, shh. Um, but with that being said, like there was a few important, I would say, facts or not facts, but like theories that are gonna kind of get us talking here. So to start off, there's been such a variety and an immense amount of artifacts found that would tell us that Jesus wasn't the only one in his era, I would say. And honestly, John, I have like a very difficult time when it comes to like specifying uh, the time he was around and when he was growing, when he was actually doing these, like, um, what the Bible says. Let's put it that way. Like as far as like the time frame, it always
Like
gets me.
the
So
chronology of events, basically.
exactly. Yes, exactly. Always gets me. So what I found is going to be around like the entire like spectrum of like when he was around, not specifically when he was young or when he was already, you know, uh, word of God and all this. But going back into this, so this is like going into like Egyptian times where they have found scripts, amulets, and mummy tombs There's also protective images and spells that have been found in pretty much all over the world. Lebanon, oh my God, I can't say this right now. Ethiopia and Rome. So quite a lot of artifacts, a lot of items, that people are questioning, like, whoa, like, where's this coming from? Like, what does this mean? Some of those, and specifically one that I was actually amused by, was the sculpture, the small sculpture that we actually have all heard about in The Exorcist, and that is the Pazuzu sculpture, right?
Oh yeah, that's so famous. Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
Pazuzu.
So we were made to think, Hollywood made us think it's this evil demon thing, like terrible. And I always remember the music they played when they found it in the in the digging area and all that. Like it's always been stuck with me. But to
Mhm.
them, it really actually meant yes, he was some sort of demon, but they used it to protect themselves from even bigger, I guess, worse entities that they considered.
Right.
So to them,
Yeah,
it
that
was
was
more of a help protection. Mhm.
right. And that is something that in the Old Testament of the Bible, which if you know anything about religion, specifically Christianity, the Bible is split into two major sections, the Old Testament and the New. And the Old Testament is stories that are set thousands of years before any of the events in Jesus's life. It's focused mainly on the ancient Near East and the people that lived there in the Levant area, where you had Assyria, you had Judah and Israel, and all those people mixing it up, right? In that world back then, and the Bible does make mention of this, it was a polytheistic world, meaning they believed in many different gods and many different deities. So like there's major deities and there were lesser deities, right? And there's even a famous story in the Old Testament where I want to say it's one of Abraham's wives, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's one of Jacob's wives. Um, had household idols in her tent and had to hide them, and she sat on them to hide them. And the text doesn't make it seem like she was wrong for having them. It's just it was treated like as a matter of fact, like people just happened to have them in the house. Now, mind you, this is in the house of someone that's considered a heroic figure in a monotheistic religion, which is Judaism. So they wouldn't now modern day, Jewish people or Christians would not have household idols unless they're maybe Catholic, because some people consider their statues like as an idol, but I digress.
Mhm.
But the point is that world viewed that as a very normal thing. And when you bring up the deity like Pazuzu, in the Assyrian culture, that was one of their deities, and he had a very specific job or assignment, like you said. Like not only was he associated with, I believe, the southern winds or southwestern
Yeah.
winds,
Mhm.
he was also viewed as an amulet against other demons. So it was just that's the biggest thing about that culture is like my demon can beat up your demon, or my God can beat up your God. That is essentially what it boils down to. And if you want to be reductive about it, but it's so true. Even there's stories in the Old Testament where during the warring times of ancient Israel, they would literally carry the Ark of the Covenant from place to place. And other countries or nations would see that and get freaked out because they were literally carrying their God with them. And they were like, oh my God, that God's going to beat up our God. Okay. To
Mhm.
simplify, like it was the visual was everything, right? Like you have to have somewhere to focus your attention and your faith. Nowadays, it's so different because unless you're raised in a very visual tradition like Catholicism, most Protestant churches, like or evangelical churches, like one I was raised in, even Pentecostal faiths, they don't have iconography. They don't have statues. Everything's more abstract. You kind of see it in your mind. You pray to God in your mind. You raise your hands and you kind of speak into the ether. Nowadays, they do kind of mix it up. There's some places have like beautiful flags that you can kind of like, so they symbolize the presence of God or whatever. But essentially, it's a change in culture from like the physical artifact of a god to the more general idea of like an abstract god. And
Mhm.
yes, this does play into this idea of Jesus as was Jesus a magician? Because one of the things that kind of brought that claim upon him from people who criticized Jesus years after his death and resurrection, if you're a Christian, that he would not simply just speak and things would happen like a prophet. He would use stuff to make things happen. Like he would use clay to heal the blind eyes of a man in one scripture. So usually people that had to like use tangible stuff artifacts to make their miracles happen were viewed as part of the occult, or like a magician or some kind of ritualistic expert, essentially. So yeah, it does tie in together, this idea of like physical gods or physical things that produce a supernatural effect, right?
Exactly. The list goes on. It was such an intensive list that, I was thinking to myself, I was like, this is something that I feel a lot of us practice, even though we don't have a conscience that we do. And I say that because I'm literally wearing a bunch of EY bracelets right now. Why?
Yeah.
Like, there's probably, yeah, you have one too. And it's something like, we know possibility, it's probably maybe a placebo and makes us feel better. But you know what? I don't leave the house without it. You know what else? I don't leave without like putting agua florida like in the back of my neck and my wrist. It's a ritual. So what we
It's a
do, I would say
ritual.
modern
Yes.
day, it's not any different from what they were doing back in theirs.
Yeah,
And
psychologically,
so,
I think you're right. Evolutionarily,
mhm,
our psychology hanged on to those traits of our ancient ancestors, which was bent on superstition and seeing things through by the way of ritual. We have so many rituals today that you could even consider sacred rituals that have really nothing to do with a specific religion. It's just more, what is a ritual if not just something that you do repeatedly over and over to bring some kind of effect or feeling in your life, right? I would even argue like carrying your debit card in your pocket is a ritual because you have to use this little tiny plastic rectangle to wave it at a little temple, a little place to get something out.
yeah.
Whereas if you think about it, most things now you can do Apple Pay. You don't even need to carry your credit card around, but people still like
Mhm,
the physical feeling of carrying that little credit card or debit card around instead of leaving it at home because they're so used to
right.
that ritual of handing over the debit card. It's a ritual that produces physical
Mhm.
interaction with something intangible like money.
Exactly. Exactly. And then out of the many items that I saw, there was one which they called them magic wands, right? Again,
Mm,
my conversation with my mother when I was like 10 years old. Why can't I read Harry Potter, but I have to go read about this guy who's turned things into other things, you know? But this
mhm,
magic wand isn't what we think it is. It's actually, well, they have, found them, but it's a hippo tusk and it had writings on it, carved writings on it. They would use it in rituals where they would create circles in the sand to protect mostly
mm,
children, like especially in their like where they would sleep. And so this really like triggered my memory to how many times
mm.
have I watched Supernatural and how many times have they circled that sand
A
or
circle
dirt
of
to
salt.
protect them? Exactly, a circle of salt.
Yeah,
So I said, again, like we go back to Egyptian times and what they found, and then we have carried it over to modern day society and to like what we know, these rituals to be the same significance to protect something or protect yourself from something.
that's right.
Now,
And
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Mhm.
I was going to say, well, speaking to what you were saying, how when you were being raised in this Christian faith and yet you found it strange that you weren't allowed to read Harry Potter, right? Because in your mind, well, what's the difference? Here's this literary figure performing acts of magic or miracles, and here's this other literary figure doing the same thing. What is the difference? And in the modern Christian sense, is this whole idea of like holiness or separation, like this is bad, this is good, like this is God's and this is not God's, which we are all pretty familiar with. But that's specifically important when it comes to the topic of was Jesus a magician? Because there's this famous debate that was had in the early days of the Christian church. So this is about 170 years or so after Jesus had already done his thing. So it was the first and second century of the first Christian church, right? And there was this man named Celsus, and he wrote a book called The Truth of the Word, I believe is what it was called. But it was basically, he was criticizing Christianity. He was criticizing Jesus. And he was against everything they stood for because he believed in the pagan gods. And back in those days, if you were a good Roman citizen, you worshiped the emperor and you worshiped the Roman gods, right? So
Mhm.
this cult of people saying, no, 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 God is only Jesus, this one man. With if you were like a regular Gentile or a regular or a Jew even, to be like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? That's not how our culture works. It was a new religion. Christianity was brand new. And so this man wrote this book to say, no, Jesus was actually just a magician. Now, when he used that term, I believe it was the term in Greek, goes, I believe,
Mhm.
is used in a derogatory term way. It's not meant like as a neutral word. You're saying, no, this is a bad person. It's like an evil wizard or an evil sorcerer. He was trying to really cast doubt on Jesus's legitimacy. What he did not do is he did not say that the miracles didn't happen. He said, oh, they happened, but it was because he was using demons as the source of the power. And these are like lesser deities that were seen as either agents of the Roman gods or even just bad, bad actors in the spiritual world. Okay.
Their assistants.
Yes. Fast forward to a couple of decades later, a very famous early church father, they're called, an early Christian leader called Origen, wrote a book called Against Celsus. He literally read this book that had been out for a while, criticizing Christianity. He's like, oh, I need to write a response to this so people don't think that this guy is correct. And he wrote against him and quoted him a lot, which is how we know what that guy Celsus wrote, because his book did not survive. Everything we know was trapped in the writings of Origen. So he quoted him, and then he would like say, well, that's not true because, right? So they're going back and forth. And Origen was like, no, the miracles did happen, but they were not from lesser demons. They were because he's the son of the one true God. So they were powered by God. So right then and there, this is the first known discussion about Jesus being a magician that was recorded for historical purposes that was recorded. And you can already see the difference was one was saying the source of the power was bad. One was saying the source of the power was God Almighty or the ultimate good. And that sensibility has leaked through the conversation ever since, right? So when even to your present day, when you were being raised and your mom was like, Harry Potter bad, but Jesus good.
Yeah,
whether she knew it or not, she's acting out in a way that same debate, right? The same themes in that debate that there's not, because most Christians will not deny, if they're like really fundamentalist Christians, they won't deny the supernatural acts of the Bible. They will not say that the supernatural acts didn't happen. They will just say they're from God, so they're okay. They're approved supernatural acts, so it's okay. But Harry Potter is not approved. They're not approved. Right? But what they don't realize by making such a comparison, what you're doing is you're supposed to be like highlighting the deity of Jesus, right? But you're lowering yourself to argue with a fictional character. So what you're actually doing is making them equivalent. You're saying Jesus is a literary character.
Yeah.
They kind of like shoot themselves in the foot. It's like, okay, because they're trying to say Harry Potter's fake is a fake character, but the power he represents is real. Oh, it's bad magic. Well, you can't have it both ways. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Right.
So that's my little tidbit on that. But yeah, that's where the debate started. But if you think about it, that's crazy, because imagine you do something important now and then you die. And then 170 years later, somebody says that what you did was not good. And then like 50, 60 years after that, somebody else says, actually, what she did was right. Like, who cares at this point, right? Because we have access to a lot of information. But back then, like, there wasn't that many books, that were being protected. The lore was all oral tradition, right? So, but it's just from our point of view, it's like, what a dumb debate to have. Why would you even? But because of that, we know that this idea was around in the early days of the church, and it has persisted to this day. I'm sure there's people that still believe, oh, Jesus is just some random magician. He wasn't nobody special. What they mean is, in a way, he was just a wizard. He was just like a man that did some tricks and probably did some real acts, but they were from the devil or they were from demons. So he ain't no different than XYZ. And then you had the other the Christians who are defending him like, no, his power is authorized. It's okay, right? Anyways.
Which, how do we know that? But along with him, I did find two other individuals that were also considered to be magicians or miracle workers during his heyday. So the first one was a Jewish holy man by the name of Honi the circle drawer. Oh my God, my English is terrible today. But they were, well, he wasn't the only one, actually. According to what I found, there were a number of Jewish holy men who have great signs attributed to them. And one of those was Honi, or Onias, the circle drawer. We learn about him from first century writer Flavius Josephus. And he was said to have prayed for rain, and the rain came down. So that's pretty much just like what I guess they But don't we all do that? We're like, oh, I wish it would rain, and then it rains. Like,
Right.
so then we're all apparently magicians here. The other, the other one was
It didn't take much to
Holiness.
impress.
I know, not anymore. Of Holiness of Tiana. Again, he was most famous first century miracle worker known, and he was compared to Jesus because he had a miraculous birth and showed exceptional ability as a child, performed miracles during his life, including bringing a young girl back from the dead, and appeared to his
Mhm.
own followers after death. That was a new one
Mm,
for me. Like I haven't
interesting. Yeah.
actually, yeah, heard of
That's kind
him.
of rare too, because you don't really read too much about other people raising people from the dead. I mean, the lore is definitely there. There's cultures that, but like that's interesting because that was one of the traits that people that made people look at Jesus like, oh, he's not just a holy man. He's got to have some kind of otherworldly power because he
Right.
healed the sick and raised the dead and cast out demons and all these things. But it's those things. You're right. Were not unique to just Jesus. Other people
Mm-hmm.
around that time claimed to have done the same things. Right. Even the Bible
Mm-hmm.
itself tells you that there were other people around the time of Jesus and after that, for example, would do exorcisms. And this you kind of see it like the doctors of their time, I guess, because like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure like, there was no scientific breakthroughs back then, right? That we know of. So your daughter fell down and had an epileptic seizure. You're like, oh, she has a demon. Call the local exorcist, and they would just come to your house and they would like perform a little ritual. You pay them their little money to the temple, and then that was it, right? So there's a story, a famous story in the book of Acts, which is in the New Testament, that it's called the Acts of the Apostles, which is stories of stuff that happened after Jesus left the earth, and this is like the early church story, right? And there was a group of Jewish exorcists who tried to use the name of Jesus to cast out a spirit from a person, and the spirit mocked them and said, I know Jesus and I know Paul, but who are you? And like beat them up, right? So there's a very, yeah, it's like I could almost see like
Mm-hmm.
being using a modern horror story kind of setting, but
Yeah.
like essentially it was a story that was written just to say that the name of Jesus is more powerful than anything else you could throw at the
Mm-hmm.
devil. So don't use anything else. Just trust us. We can handle it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
propaganda, right, for Christians.
Right.
So, but it also highlights the fact that it was just a commonplace thing to have just Jewish exorcists walking around that you would call upon if you needed a quick exorcism, which is so different in the way we think about it now, where it's like if
Mm-hmm.
you need an exorcism, where do you go to? The Catholic Church, according to Hollywood and everybody else.
According to
And then it's like it goes through this long process, and there's not that many exorcist priests that can do it, and you may get rejected or whatever. And yet in the old days, it was just like, go get the local exorcist. So to those people, Jesus was just another one of those. He's just another random
Mm-hmm.
guy. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even have an official affiliation with the temple because he's doing it freelance. Like, who is this guy? He must be some magician. And that's where those
Exactly.
stories kind of get spread around.
Mm-hmm. And going back to like how that's something that's been around forever, how people can heal and we don't actually know where the power is coming from. There was a book I read, and I did a little bit of research, and I also I did an episode on it, Pachita, the shaman, and she is from Mexico. So she actually would be able to heal and conduct surgeries by just touching the person who needed
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
And my first thought was, well, she's going to probably say it's the gift of God. But no, she said it was actually an Aztec deity that would give her the power to heal. And it was a male,
Mhm.
actually. So she says, like, the male deity would take over her body and be able to perform these surgeries with like a rusty knife and everything. And for
Oh my gosh.
some
I think I've heard of this. Yeah. It's
miracle,
some
yeah,
crazy stories coming from
yeah,
that. Yeah.
crazy stories. It's a really good book. It's a really good book. Actually, I don't remember where I got it from, but I read it over the summer, and then I did a quick episode on it. And
Nice.
many like that. It's something that even in like Mexico, we don't know how, but somehow we have all these like healing, individuals who are able to do these things, and you just don't question it. You just move on with it. So when I
Yeah,
ran
it's like
into this, yeah, exactly. Like when I ran into this theory about Jesus, I thought about that. I was like, well, it seems like a lot of it could have been twisted in order to specifically prey on a group of people. and, you know, make sure to control them in a sense. That's how I feel like a lot of religion is. Personal opinion. Don't come
Mhm.
for me. Um,
Amen to
and
that, sister.
but I say that because, like I said, growing up, the reason why I was put into these Catholic classes and like church now, I was away from my mother to control me because I was going into teenage years, and she didn't
Mhm.
know any other way but to scare me or try to scare me silly with the church. God's going to strike you down if you don't listen to me. You know, like
Of
don't talk
course,
back to
yeah.
me. You know, God's listening. Things like that. So then, like, I think my brain was already so much advanced for like someone of my age that to me I kind of already knew like that it was always about like control, like a control thing.
You're wiser
So.
than most, even myself. It took me a long
Yeah.
time to get out of religion, let me tell you.
Hmm. But honestly, there's so much information on it, and of course, like you said, there's so much text and other opinions, and we can go on and on about all the things that they have found. They've actually found even like I guess what modern day would be like a bowl of like clay, and it would literally have the scripture, the writing, Jesus a magician was here, touched it, was
Mhm.
whatever it was. You know, there's so many of those items that they found all over the
Interesting.
world, you know. So
Mhm.
honestly, personally, no disrespect, but I feel like to me this is interesting because the Bible to me is just like another book you can read through and you're learning things, you know, who wrote it, why they did, maybe we won't all, you know, have an answer to. It is an interesting, you know, thing for me, and eventually one day I'll get a copy and get through all of, you know, all the I don't want to say stories, but like all of the teachings.
But I mean, that's actually, I mean, even if you talk to a non-believing biblical scholar whose job it is just to study the Bible, they would tell you it's a book of stories. That's not a derogatory
Mhm.
thing, it's a fact.
Okay.
Because
Hmm.
what's what's subjective is, do you personally believe the stories are real, or that they're divine? But they are stories. It's a book of stories. And
Hmm.
it is one of the most influential, most popular books ever, but it doesn't, that in and of itself, right, shouldn't be enough for you to convince anyone that what's in the books, and I say books plural because there's 66 books in the Protestant version of the Bible, that they're authoritative, or they're the definitive, ultimate capital T truth. Like, that's up to the individual to suss out. And as I have read the Bible through many times, and I can tell you from personal experience, there's a few passages that I absolutely love, even though I don't no longer attend church. They're very comforting, or they're very beautiful passages. But I would not base my life, knowing now what I know now, I would not base my life on it. There's
Hmm.
nothing in it that's that urgent that needs to be applied to modern day life that you can't figure out with a little bit of common sense. Okay, like, that's the facts. Now, if you're interested
Hmm.
in antiquity, if you're interested on how the ancient people thought about stuff, then it's a beautiful resource for that. It's also great to see kind of like how a legend grows, how a myth grows over time. It's also interesting if you feel like you need some kind of moral direction or purpose or whatever, you can find something like that there. It did for me for many years, until I found something better, essentially, which is just it's just a way for you to deal with life. We all need something to get through life, and there's
That's
nothing
true.
wrong with looking to the Bible or any holy book for that, in my opinion. But I would not hold it up as a capital T truth, because that is,
Right.
first of all, very limiting, and also puts you in a bad position, because now it's up to you to like prove that to yourself and others if you're a preacher, and it's not easy to
Hmm.
do. Not easy to, especially in
Hmm.
today's age where there's so much information available and there's so many different views and interpretations. Like, how could you
Sure.
possibly? It's such a ridiculous task, in my opinion, to try to
Hmm.
do that. But anyways, I wanted to say though, really quick, I don't know how much time we have, but the whole idea of magic and all the, like you're saying, people in the ancient world, these artifacts of things that we still have, it's a record of in history, a tangible record, that people used to look to certain objects and things and objects of faith for real change in their lives, in their bodies, whether it was to bless a marriage, to bless the crops, to heal somebody who was sick. And to this day, we still do that. Even with our scientific minds or our
Hmm.
Western mind, we still do that. I'm pointing you right now to a report that came out in September 5th, 2017, that was a research study that was done. This is in the National Library of Medicine. PubMed, if you're looking for an actual scientific paper that kind of ties all this together, I think this is a good one. The title of this is, you know what, everybody knows, I think by now, what Reiki is. Reiki is like, healing through energy, right? A lot of people on TikTok have like Reiki channels and things like that. The title of this scientific paper, I want you to get this to your mind. It's a scientific, Reiki is better than placebo and has broad potential as a complementary health therapy. This is written by a PhD, okay? And it's a great resource. And, if you know anything about how academic papers are written, anyone can write an academic paper and publish it. But if it has to be peer reviewed, someone can catch something and be like, well, actually, that's not true. And that's the beauty of science. You can question everything. But the fact that this paper was done and it was studied and they actually did they selected for criteria, they did all these things, and they could measure the physiological difference in people's bodies when Reiki was used and when it wasn't used. It was like mind-blowing. So that gives you a little bit more of something of a credibility to this idea that there's something out there maybe that's just not just placebo thinking, right? Because placebo effect is pretty powerful. But if this is better than placebo, what does that tell you? Maybe the ancient people they were on to something. This is like, maybe that magic did work for them, the same way that this Reiki worked in the scientific study for these patients. And it's like, I'll let you look up the paper and you can make up your own mind, but it does give me this, it's not a confirmation really, but it is a interesting indicator that us as a human system, as a species on this planet, refuse to let go of things that are superstitious, because I believe, this is my personal opinion, that something deeply in our own psyche tells us that this is okay, that this is part of being human. That is something that it's like an ancestral knowledge that we know we can make things happen if we believe in them hard enough. And that sounds so woo, but then when you try it and it works, what are you supposed to think? Oh, it's just coincidence? Okay, well, it can't be coincidence 4 times in a row in a scientific study. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I guess it can be, probability being what it is. But I think it's a pretty interesting way of looking at magic in the modern day. And that's why you have this movement of quote unquote witches or whatever who claim to be atheistic witches. Like they don't believe, like, for example, demons are capital R real, but like that they're symbols of an archetype, that they represent something in the human psyche. So when they do rituals with these entities, stuff happens in their lives because they maybe are leaning upon that X factor, that placebo thing, or that thing that's better than placebo, and they're activating it through something that makes sense to them. Ultimately, it's what makes sense to you as a person. And if it works for you, why would you poo-poo all over it, right? So ultimately, to wrap it all up, in my view, was Jesus a magician? Yes and no. If you mean it as, was he a wizard, a sorcerer, was out to deceive people and take their money?
Was he Dumbledore?
Well, not just like, people in the ancient time, they were saying it like as a slur, like, oh, he's a wizard, like he's a bad guy, he's just doing this to like lead you astray. I don't believe that. But do I believe that he demonstrated that he has some kind of healing faith type power? I do believe that. As far as the stories themselves, now, did it historically happen? That I don't know. But if you're looking at just the story, I believe that the portrayal of him is not as an evil wizard, but it's as a more of a faith healer type, right? And we're not even going to get into the whole, was he God or not? Because the question is, was he a magician? Depends what type of magician you're talking about, right? That's what it goes down to. Was he a evil magician? No. Was he a good magician? I think so, right? In the sense of like, what was the fruit of his things? People were feeling good about following him around. They were saying they were getting healed. So what's the difference between that and somebody going to a Reiki master?
Exactly.
You know? That's just me. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, my 2 cents, no. So, no, I am very familiar with the Reiki videos on TikTok because sometimes fall asleep to them. And you do sometimes feel something. You said it could just be me, but I have said in the past, we humans are powerful beings. We just don't know the extent of our abilities. And again, a lot of literature that I've been fortunate to read. One of those is actually one of the books I think I lent you a few months ago was the Four Agreements, and how
Mm,
our, what we say out loud is actually really important, and how we say it,
that's right.
Again, like, we're very powerful creatures. I just don't think that we know to what extent. And some of us, that light that we have internally when we land in this, crazy planet, um, we turn off when we don't believe in that, when we don't have a clear vision of what, our power is, or what our goal is in this, earth. And so I feel like a lot of us, lose that light, and somehow we start. There's a show that I'm thinking about, and I think it's just because it's like about vampires and that how they suck your energy and all that. But it's true. There's actual people that are like energy suckers, and so that can
Mhm.
also affect the ability to do this. And I'm not saying we can all go and heal other people. We just said we can heal ourselves, though. Like, I think that we all have the ability to do that. So again, like, going back to it, for me, because I'm not religious, I thought it was really interesting all the information I found, on just a belief that he could possibly just be, a regular human being. Maybe he did have a calling, but more than he shared that vision
Mhm.
and his gift with the world, right?
Yeah.
And whatever happened after, with the whole Bible and thing, well, there's always reporters, what can we say?
Hmm.
Like, always reporters. But no, I really enjoyed like looking into, and there were so many opinions. Some people were mad in those forums, because again,
Hmm.
they have grown up a certain kind of way, believing certain kind of things, and no one can get them off that high horse. That is okay. I've run into those people myself, and all I say is like, I am just not educated enough in the matter to give you my opinion. And that's how I get out of those
Always a good
conversations.
response. Always a good response too. The smartest people in the room are the ones who say they're not the smartest, essentially. They're the ones who admit they don't know everything. And the people that say that they know everything, they're the ones that are dumb. Okay.
I'm
Like
real
if they're
quick to get a
super
conversation now.
certain, yeah, I'm never, I don't say, I used to be one of those people. I used to think I had all the answers when I was a Christian and all that. But now I realize that no, that's not the way life works. That's not the way society works, or it's even improved by having people running around saying that my opinion is the only one that matters. And when it's really just that, it's not based on anything of no real evidence at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And it opens your mind up to realize that, like I said, like at the end of the day, what matters is some people like to have faith, and that faith helps them. And as long as it's
Mhm.
not hurting anyone, who cares at the end of the day?
Exactly.
If you
Agree.
don't want to engage with faith at all, I just want to live a rationalistic, materialist sort of view, like that's fine too. Like, hello, like we
Hmm.
can thrive with both ways of thinking. But
Yes,
at the end of the day, it's your decision. What do you want to get out of your experience in life? No one else can
exactly.
tell you how to do that except
Hmm.
following your own instinct, which could lead you to a religious experience, or it may not. So it's just, how can you put a hard truth claim on something that transitional? Because people change.
Hmm.
People are always in a constant state of change.
That's very true. Recently I was up going to, I think, Austin, no, San Marcos over the weekend. And I went through or saw a Buddhist temple, and it triggered a memory for me. Like, I was Buddhist for a few weekends in Chicago because, again, searching for something within myself to, like, turn on that internal light. And so,
I
yeah,
love
I
Buddhist
agree.
philosophy. I do. I read
Yeah,
Buddhist books. I read all kinds of stuff. I have a book on all the different religions of the world right here. It's fascinating
yeah,
stuff, and
yeah,
you can learn a little something from everybody.
exactly.
But it's really,
Hmm.
what are you trying to get out of life? Because I just firmly believe that, not to get all preachy about it, but when it comes to the end of your life, you should be able to look back upon it with hardly any regrets. Try to have as little regret as possible. And one of those things in my list is like just to follow things that give you joy, or it's something that you're fascinated with, you know.
Exactly.
And
Hmm.
that's sometimes, and for me, it turned out to be religion for a long time, but now it just turns out that it's not that. My
Hmm.
experience of life wants different things, so I just follow that. Follow the dopamine.
Oh, that would be,
I follow
I
the
love that.
dopamine. Okay, I'm ADHD. I follow my dopamine.
Mhm. Well, John, always a pleasure having you on my channel.
Likewise. Thank
We're
you so
definitely have
much.
to, no, we have so many other topics we're going to touch on, especially now
I
that I was
know.
like, we got to do a follow up on that spiny killer, because I'm sure there's much more
Yes.
evidence that's been
I
brought to
know, right?
light.
It's got to be. And I just saw
Mhm.
it too. Yeah, that news report. So let's do that. Let's come back and do it again.
Well, there you have it, guys. Again, stay curious. take what you want from our episode. Again, we're not scholars. We just like voicing our
Absolutely
opinion.
not.
And at stake, question things, read something new, do something new, just question things, enjoy life. Honestly, that's all I can say. That's all I did during this reading. And honestly, it brought me back to like, oh, I should really check out that article, that book. I should do this, I should that. Like it started, running my brain, and I've been doing, a lot of research too for future episodes. So it always makes me happy. And again, just seeking that dopamine, like that's really what I want to do. So there you have it, guys. You have officially heard the new, right? Like brand new or rebranding, should I say, L Unfiltered podcast. And John, thank you for joining me. Any last thoughts?
Well, just thank you for having me. I wish you lots of success with the new podcast, the new direction of the podcast, I should say, because you have a lot of good content already out there that people should check out. I don't have any last thoughts other than y'all read a book. Crack open a book, guys. Information is out there. Most of it is free. Okay, go find something new and go learn it.
Exactly. And if you don't know, I know many free links to send you guys. Again, thank you for listening. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.